It's 2 in the afternoon on Thursday, August 28th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. These are the stories we're following at this hour. A father of a student victim of April's ferry sinking ends his 7-week hunger strike. Attention turns to whether the move will lead the ferry bill out of political limbo. Japan's premier sends a message of support honoring war criminals. His acknowledgment of them as the foundation of Japan is likely to cause friction with neighboring countries. And Ukraine accuses Russian forces of intruding into its territory. This only a day after their leaders seem to make progress in their meeting in Belarus. And our top story at this hour, a father whose teenage daughter died in April's Sewol-ho ferry sinking ended his nearly 7-week hunger strike earlier on this Thursday. His representative says it's not because there has been meaningful progress in negotiations, but because he has to live to fight on. Kim Young-gil has this report.
A prominent relative of the victims of the ferry disaster ended his 46-day hunger strike, raising hopes of a breakthrough in a political deadlock that has paralyzed parliamentary proceedings in Korea for months. The fasting by Kim Young-ho, the father of one of 233 students killed in the April ferry sinking, has been the focal point of protests by victims' families demanding an independent investigation into the circumstances behind the disaster.
At the request of victims' families and the public, Kim Young-ho is ending his hunger strike. But he will continue his long fight to end the current standoff over the ferry bill.
The families want a committee in charge of the probe to be given investigative powers, but rival parties have been unable to come to terms on an agreement that satisfies all sides. The bereaved families say the end of Kim's hunger strike is not indicative of any progress being made in negotiations, and that their protests will continue. But the end of Kim's fasting is raising hopes that differences will be bridged. The ruling's Henry Party is most optimistic. Ruling party leaders held a second round of talks with representatives of the victims' families on Wednesday and reported progress. Another meeting is scheduled for next Monday. The talks are taking place with a newfound sense of urgency. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy has boycotted all parliamentary activities in protest at the ruling party's refusal to give bereaved family members a greater say in negotiations over a bill that would probe the causes of the ferry accident. The ruling and opposition parties have reached agreement on the legislation on 2 previous occasions, but both drafts were rejected by the Sewol ferry families. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
The South Korean Defense Ministry has dismissed claims suggested in a U.S. report which said North Korea is building a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. Seoul's Defense Ministry official says to be able to launch a ballistic missile, the submarine would need to weigh at least 3,000 tons, but the largest identified submarine so far in the North Korean Navy only weighs 1,800 tons. This comes after a U.S.-based web magazine reported that a new type of missile launch tube was observed on a submarine by U.S. intelligence agencies, hinting at the possibility that Pyongyang may be close to developing a ballistic missile submarine. The Japanese government has confirmed that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe recently sent a note hailing some of the country's worst war criminals as martyrs and the foundation of the country. The news may further strain Tokyo's ties with neighboring countries, including Korea. Kwon So-ah reports.
Unfortunately, it comes as no great surprise anymore that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe chooses to glorify some of Japan's worst war criminals, much to the despair and anger of Japan's neighbors who suffered so terribly under Japanese imperialism. On Wednesday, Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga confirmed that Abe sent a note in late April to an annual memorial ceremony at the Goyasan Buddhist Temple in western Japan. In his message, Abe offers his sincere condolences to the criminals, whom he refers to martyrs that became the foundation of the country's peace and prosperity. He also wished for eternal peace and pledged to pave the way to a harmonious human coexistence in the future. Former Japanese military officers, the organizers of the ceremony, said it was the first time for a sitting prime minister to send such note, but Suga said Abe's remarks did not come from his capacity as prime minister.
In this case, he sent this message as Shinzo Abe and the head of the Liberal Democratic Party. As such, the government thinks of him in this respect as a private citizen.
The ceremony's venue has a compound founded in 1994, worshipping nearly 1,200 soldiers convicted of some of the worst wartime crimes. It includes 14 Class A war criminals that are also honored at the more well-known Yasukuni War Shrine in Tokyo. Abe's visit to the shrine last December outraged Korea and China. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Back here in the nation, Korea logged yet another current account surplus in July. That's 29 months in a row now. It stood at $7.91 billion, almost unchanged both from last month and from July of last year, according to the Bank of Korea. Exports of products rose 1% from a year earlier to almost $54 billion, while imports increased 3.5% to $47 billion on the back of strong oil prices. The Bank of Korea, however, adds the rise in imports does not necessarily indicate a pickup in domestic demand. Experts also raise concerns that excessive surpluses would put pressure on the already fast appreciating local currency. Kia Motors is looking to expand its presence in the North American market by building a huge plant in South America. The company says it will be a great access point, which will help Kia take a better advantage of a growing industrial base. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
Korea's second largest automaker, Kia Motors Corporation, plans to build its first factory in Pesqueria, Mexico, just 200 kilometers south of the U.S. state of Texas. The company will invest more than $1 billion in the plant, which covers 500,000 square meters of land. The assembly plant is expected to start producing 300,000 Forte compact cars and Rio subcompacts in a year.
So this additional 300,000 will help us to be one of the leading automotive manufacturers in the global market.
Mexico has been a great attraction for the automotive industry. Local demand for cars is around 1 million units a year, and labor is cheap and highly productive. The country also boasts great access to markets in the U.S. and Canada, as Mexico is a member of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Due to this, auto giants including General Motors, Volkswagen, Toyota, and Nissan have already built assembly lines in the country. Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto says Kia's expansion in the region will help boost investment in the country.
Kia's commitment is to induce more investment from auto part companies of $1.5 billion.
Korean automakers have to pay duties of up to 20% when directly exporting to Mexico due to lack of a free trade agreement between the two countries. But now with a plant in Mexico, Kia expects to raise the proportion of its global production from 44% to rival that of other automotive giants, which hover around 75%. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Korea has apparently been spending way too much money to make up for the lack of economic participation by women. A new report says government funds are working moms are being wasted, and more needs to be done to get those women back to work after having kids. Shin Se-min tells us more.
Roughly $192 billion. That's the social cost over the past 13 years due to the lagging economic participation rate of women in Korea, according to a new report by the Korean Women's Development Institute. It points out three main sources for the total. They include reduced salaries for women who re-enter the workplace, the expenses to retain these female employees once they return to the workforce, and an increase in government budget to support the economic participation of women. The $192 billion total suggests a number of things, one being that government efforts to address the gender gap in the Korean workplace have not been effective. Many Korean women leave their careers to raise children and have difficulties returning to the workforce later on. When they do, they're often forced to settle for lower-paying part-time jobs. Over $600 million in this year's national budget are allocated towards supporting the economic participation of women and helping them keep their jobs. But the report suggests that the money is not being used effectively, and it calls for changes, pointing out that Korea's aging population and low birth rate are major obstacles for future growth, and that getting women more actively engaged would help minimize the negative effects. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
In the year 2012 for Korea was at its record high.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul.
Shopping market thinks the true meaning of creation shines through. It's only been a day since the leaders of Ukraine and Russia met in Belarus, but Ukraine is accusing Russia of crossing over its southeast border with military forces. The U.S. State Department says a Russia-led counteroffensive may be in the works. Our Yudian has more.
The House of Culture in the eastern Ukraine rebel stronghold of Donetsk consumed in fire. While some fled, some stayed to examine the damage. Locals there say the fire killed one and left a few others wounded. This comes as Ukraine accused Russia of new military incursions on Wednesday, the latest development in 5 months of fighting between Ukrainian government forces and pro-separatist rebels. Russia has constantly denied accusations it is supplying weapons and sending soldiers to help the rebel forces. No reaction yet from Moscow on the alleged incursion. This latest escalation comes only a day after hours of talks between the two countries' presidents seem to mark a turning point in a 5-month-old crisis. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko and Russian President Vladimir Putin, along with EU representatives, met on Tuesday in Minsk.
Yesterday's talks in Minsk were very effective. I clearly stressed that there will be no bargaining over sovereignty, territorial integrity, the independence of our country, the sovereign choice of the Ukrainian people.
Following the talks, Putin also said Moscow will contribute to create a situation of trust, but hopes the war that killed over 2,200 had hit a turning point are quickly fading from Wednesday's attack. Also, less than 24 hours since the Minsk meeting, Ukraine warned Europe that Russia plans to halt gas transit to Europe by the end of the year. Russia denied the claim, saying it is making maximum efforts to fulfill its contracts with Europe. Yurian, Arirang News.
IMF chief Christine Lagarde is being investigated for her role in a controversial payout during her term as French finance minister. She is suspected of simple negligence in a case that led the French government to cash out 400 million euros to business tycoon Bernard Tapie. The French magistrate is considering possible corruption in the case of whether the arbitration process was rigged in favor of the businessman who supported Nicolas Sarkozy in France's 2007 presidential race. Lagarde called the suspicion baseless and said she was returning to Washington, D.C. after undergoing 15 hours of questioning at the Court of Justice in Paris. A judge in California has rejected Apple's request for an injunction against the sale of 9 Samsung phones in the United States. Apple had argued that its business would be harmed irreparably if Samsung were allowed to continue selling phones that were found to have infringed on Apple patents earlier this year. U.S. District Judge Lucy Koh on Wednesday rejected that notion, saying Apple hadn't proved its claims. While Apple declined to comment on the ruling, Samsung welcomed it and said the company remains committed to providing American consumers with a wide choice of their innovative products. And now on to a slightly nostalgic item. If you grew up in Korea in the 80s or 90s or even in the 2000s, you have with no doubt heard of banana-flavored milk made by a company called 빙그레. Well, the beverage is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. Our Kani Lee tells us the secret behind its long-running popularity.
It was in 1974. when banana-flavored milk first appeared in stores around Korea in its unique jug-shaped bottle. It came out at a time when the Korean government was urging its citizens to drink more milk. To encourage people, food and beverage manufacturer Bingure had the bright idea to flavor the milk with banana, a fruit once considered a luxury.
Bananas were expensive during that time and not easily available. People appreciated just getting a taste of this fruit through this drink.
The drink was a big hit then, and it's still a big hit now, enjoyed by people of all ages.
I like it because it's sweet. My friends like it too, and drinking it makes us happy.
Over 800,000 bottles are produced each day as the company's factories strive to meet the demand. In Korea alone, about 250 million bottles of banana milk are sold each year. That means in Korea, an average person drinks about 5 a year. Sales also back up the drink's increasing popularity. From 92 billion won, or about $90 million in 2005, sales surpassed $148 million in 2013.
Overall, we believe the drink's unchanging nature makes it a success. The taste and look of the drink hasn't changed much over the past 40 years. And in the next 40 years, we want to be a recognized global brand like Coca-Cola.
The drink is already being recognized in China. Exports were a mere 500 million won in 2009, but they reached 15 billion won, or about $14.8 million last year. Officials credit the popularity of the Korean wave and the increased number of Chinese tourists to Korea for the explosive growth of banana-flavored milk. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Korea's leading orchestra, the Seoul Philharmonic, has wrapped up their European tour with a performance at a 120-year-old festival that features some 80 concerts every summer. Our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won, who's traveling with the orchestra, filed this report from London.
The BBC Proms is one of the world's greatest classical music festivals, founded back in 1895. Since then, the annual event has showcased the most prestigious orchestras and musicians. This is where the Proms concerts are held every evening from the month of July through September, all broadcast live on BBC Radio 3. And the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra makes its debut here at the Proms this summer as the first Korean orchestra to take part in its 120-year history. Maestro Jung Myung-hoon, who's led the orchestra since 2005, nurturing it to become one of Asia's best while at the helm, says he's excited to meet the audience members at the Proms.
It is a great honor to be asked to participate in this festival, and it is a recognition of the quality of the orchestra. But I think as performers, once we start a concert, all those things don't matter. It's just that public.
The Seoul Philharmonic performs 3 repertoires: Debussy's La Mer, Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 6, and a contemporary piece written by prominent Korean composer Eun Suk-jin titled Su Concerto for Shan and Orchestra.
This piece is very abstract, but they have so amazing, so thousand colors between the chord harmony, between breathing. Each breathing is so organic.
With its London performance, the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra wraps up its 2014 European tour, spanning 4 music festivals, including the Grafeneck in Austria and the Merano in Italy. Park Ji-won, Arirang News, London.
Now, including classical music, finding inspiration is often the biggest challenge for artists, but sometimes it can be found right under their noses. Today, our Im Yoon-hee joins us with some artists who have done just that, along with a special venue where those artists exhibit their work. Good afternoon, Yoon-hee.
Good afternoon. Right. So this art exhibition looks to water for its muse, and like you mentioned, it does take place at the Seoul Olympic Park right here in our own backyard. And so, first of all, 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, and even our bodies is made up of more than 70% water as well. And so we all need water, including this exhibition. So take a look.
It can be found almost everywhere. Water is one of the most precious elements on Earth. And on top of it being essential to all life, water is a bountiful source of artistic inspiration. The Soma Museum is home to some of Korea's most intriguing modern and contemporary artworks. And now it holds the works of 22 artists. Artists inspired by water's fluidity, its emptiness, and most of all, its capacity for pure, childlike innocence.
Water can be described as completely pure and innocent. Using that idea of innocence, artists can expand their imaginations and explore their inner childlike purity. It heals the person and brings people together.
And that's exactly what artist Kang Eun-soo does. Titled Membranes, Kang creates an interactive experience that envelopes the audience together, lapping them in images of cool water. Like you're floating in an actual pool. The artwork reacts to its audience, creating ripples around the room. Artist Lee Ki-bong takes a different approach. Inside a large lit tank, a book eerily floats back and forth, its pages slowly fanned by the water. Other artists also show the adaptable properties of water and all that it can do, like capture and reflect light. The surface of water can hold an aspect of mystery, while still shining a delicate light.
When I stand and look at the reflection of water or at an endless beach, I feel so inspired by nature and my soul is clear. So with this project, I combine the image of a boat with nature. I use stainless steel because it looks almost like a mirror and I can see my reflection as well as a reflection of light onto other surfaces. When the light hits the top, it rises back up beautifully like it does in nature, commanding a sense of respect.
The possibilities of water are ever flowing, and its use in our daily lives continues to grow. Though it's a source of artistic creativity at this museum, it's the lifeline that connects all beings together. It's a precious part of our lives, and it must be protected, so that there's always enough to enshroud us all.
So finding inspiration from very close close proximity, and we just don't know where to look for inspirations. But how were the artists able to come together? I mean, how did they know each other in the first place, I guess?
So the museum did a really good job in bringing these artists together. You know, all of these artists they come from different paths in life, but they all felt, an awe for water. They really had this respect and reverence for water, and they all had different ideas of water as well. So some of them put it to like practical use in our everyday lives, whereas other artists look to nature and look to water and its natural surroundings for inspiration.
So let's talk a little bit more about the venue, the Olympic Park.
Right.
Tell us more about
the Seoul Olympic Park, a very popular place here in Korea. Many people have gone. I'm sure you've gone as well.
Right.
And so the park itself has some beautiful venues, beautiful attractions as well, some fountains, as you can see, and they also have some cute streams. So it's very peaceful, very enjoyable, good
right
place
in the middle
for
of the
family.
city.
Right, so a good escape, a good natural escape for those who are looking to get away from the hustle and bustle. It's very child-friendly, as you can see. And
yeah, I can see that.
Right, so they have a lot of structures. You're looking at some artwork that they actually put up. It's a sculpture park as well, and so it's a very popular sculpture park. And in my opinion, it's one of the best in the area, in the country actually, because it does really have a wide range of different sculptures and different artists, and some very, very well-known artists' works as well.
So you see playgrounds, you see sculptures, and they don't have admission fees, or?
So the museum actually does, but it's very reasonable. So it's only about $3 for general admission and $2 for youth and $1 for children. So I mean, it's very popular with the families. It's easy to go, not really a burden, you know, because it's so cheap. And so I actually saw many students there going together without any guardians, you know, without any adults. And so the museum itself, someone wants to make it very accessible for everybody, and I think they did a great job with that. And so not only is it interesting and an excellent, you know, exhibition to see, but also they made it very reasonable in terms of pricing, so kids can go there without really
no money needed to enter the park.
Right.
Maybe it's a good idea for families to have an outing this weekend, perhaps.
So weather permitting, you know, they can take a trip out there. The Seoul Olympic Park has many other venues. They have a lot of other showings and concerts there as well. And so if you want more information, you could always look online. In fact, this weekend, they're supposed to have 3 more concerts. So there's always something going on there. So you're going to want to check it out, maybe check the schedule ahead of time and see what's going on.
All right. Thank you very much. A good outing plan or idea for the weekend.
Perfect
Thank
for the
you,
weekend.
Uni.
It was a pleasure.
Well, that's all we have for you now. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with more updates at 4 p.m. Korea time.